This has got to be probably the most boring video that I have filmed. So this is probably one of the least inspiring videos that I've done. Functional, and you know, something that gets a lot of questions, especially in the last video I did where I was talking about the cost of ownership. In my infinite wisdom, I mentioned that I multiplied my average MPG by the number of miles I've done and the average fuel cost, but I didn't actually include what that average MPG was, so complete fail on my behalf there, and thank you to everybody who's sort of been asking for that figure in the comments. Hopefully this video goes a bit of a way into sort of explaining what the real world MPG sort of figures are for this type of car. We all know manufacturers, or some certain manufacturers recently, have been a little bit guilty of massaging the figures that they put out to the public at point of sale for these cars. So I think it's really important to have a very clear snapshot of exactly what that looks like, and you know, real world examples. So I've set up the second GoPro looking at the digital dash in the centre of the dial cluster here. Yes, before anybody asks, that is very technical adhesive. That is blue tack, so please don't judge me. I didn't really want to put an adhesive GoPro mount on my steering shroud. What that camera will do is it will allow you to look at exactly what I'm seeing when I'm driving. It will show you the instantaneous MPG readouts. It will show you the average MPG for the trip. Everything I'm looking at when I'm flipping between different driving modes, it will let you see that as well. So what I'll do is at various points I'll overlay that on the screen so that you can really get an insight into what it's like being sat in this car, and you know that it's raw, unfiltered, just truth about what this car is churning out in the way of data and performance. So let's get on with it. So the first one I'm going to do is quite an energetic pull out from a junction, and then settling down to about 30 mile an hour, just to show you what it's like pulling out from a side road and what that computer's giving you. So down on the bottom right you'll have the instantaneous MPG, and on the top right is the average MPG for this trip. You can see I've reset the computer, so let's go. So a good example of some town driving here, because what you're getting is that up and down where I'm moving in and around the traffic. I'm now settling into a bit of a rhythm at 30 mile an hour, using the cruise control just to try and keep it consistent. And what you'll see is at around this speed we've got a slight incline in the road. We're getting about 31 miles to the gallon instantaneously. Starting to go downhill a little bit now, so slight negative gradient, you'll see that improve. So we're now approaching a point in the road where we're coming out of a 30 mile an hour zone, and it's increasing to 60 mile an hour. I am sat in a bit of traffic, so if we're lucky we might get a bit of overtaking, see what that does to our MPG, and also I'll then settle back down to about 58-60 mile an hour so we can see exactly what happens to our fuel consumption. So going quite low there, which is not surprising given that this is a high consumption, high displacement car churning out 550 brake horsepower. I'm off the throttle, coasting, and you can see it's just instantaneously reading 99 miles to the gallon because the engine isn't having to do any work. As I come back on the throttle, again that's dropped. First thing I'm going to do is pull out of a side road in automatic mode, normal mode, not dynamic, and just see what that does as the car moves through the gears in a standard driving mode. keep an eye on the screen. So we got pretty low there as we were pulling out of the side road. As you can see, once you get up to speed with the cruise on and you settle down into a bit of a rhythm, the MPG is actually pretty good. I'm going to let this run a little bit and just see what it does to our average over the course of a distance. We'll see what we get to when that clock on the top left there is saying about a mile. You can just see the average MPG ticking up in the top corner there. It's really quite impressive. 60 mile an hour in a 5 litre car, 550 brake horsepower, and we're getting an instantaneous MPG on the flat of there or thereabouts 50 MPG. Now I know driving conditions, temperature, road surface, gradient, this isn't town driving, yes, but I still think that's pretty impressive. No, I didn't buy the car to be a Prius. No, I'm not claiming that it's the most economical thing in the world. It's far from. But, for those people asking, if I was in the market for one of these cars, I'd be pretty impressed with that. So we actually drove up to Scotland in this earlier in the year, and we were sitting at about this speed most of the way up, and it was about the journey, not the destination for us. And we stopped at various points on the way up, made a bit of a road trip of the journey up, and we got roughly there or thereabouts these results across. I think that was probably, all in all, that trip was maybe 2,500 miles across the course of a week. It's quite surprising from a car like this. So I'm now running out of long, straight, empty road. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull over, I'm going to reset the trip computer, and I'm going to do a couple of different driving modes. I'm going to flick between dynamic and I'm going to flick between normal driving modes whilst we're sat on cruise control, and see if those two have any difference to the MPG that the computer's going to turn out. So again, just going to pull out of a side road. I'm going to get up to speed and reset my trip computer. There we go, that's reset. Let's get the instantaneous MPG back down the bottom there. I'm going to get up to speed, back up to 58 mile an hour. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to toggle between dynamic and standard driving modes. You'll be able to see that on the camera that's pointing at the screen there. So, dynamic. Not a huge difference. I think we're going over a bit of a rougher road surface at the moment, which is why we've seen a little dip in the MPG there. Let's just leave it in dynamic for a little while and see where we get. Yeah, back up to around that high 40s mark that we've been at before. Let's take it back out of dynamic mode. Very little difference. In my experience, dynamic mode, amongst other things, it changes where the accelerator is in the throttle travel, if that makes sense. So when in dynamic mode, I'll make the numbers up. 20% throttle is actually more like 30 or 40% throttle, so less of a press of that throttle pedal gives you more of your available power. Depends what package you've got, what upgrades you've got on your car. It will also do things like stiffen the suspension if you've got the active suspension. It will do things like stiffen the steering, open the exhaust valves. I mean, just have a listen to this. And you can see that MPG plummet straight away. As soon as you put your foot down, that's where this car becomes thirsty. So let's pull over, let's reset the trip computer again. I don't think there's a huge amount of difference when you're sat on cruise control just between the driving modes. We'll reset the computer and we'll start moving through the gears using the manual gearbox. I'll use the paddles. It's no different than if you're going to use the gear stick there. I'm going to use the paddles and we'll just see what the different rev bands, you know, what impacts they have on the instantaneous readout from the MPG. So I'll spin around, reset, and let's go again. So let's reset that trip computer once more. Took me a little while to figure out how to do that actually. And we're going to take a fairly spirited drive out from here in dynamic mode. Going to get that instantaneous MPG back for you. I had a car behind me at the junction, sorry. So sounds amazing, as you can see. That instantaneous MPG goes through the floor when you start having a bit of fun in this. Once you get higher up the rev range, you stop short shifting at about 2.5 grand. It really does just drink fuel. You can see there, I'm on the off throttle. We're getting a really inaccurately high reading because the engine's doing nothing, we're coasting. But if I slow down again and I come back into the higher rev ranges and just put a bit of accelerator behind it, it's crazy. I'm probably using, in that scenario, about 30% of the available throttle in dynamic mode. So I'm going to back right off, I'm going to come right up the top of the rev range, and I'm going to give it 100% throttle and see what that does to the MPG. two MPG. I think if Jaguar could, they probably would have put a decimal point in there to give you a more accurate readout. As I said earlier, you know, that's where you have fun in this car. It really comes alive above about 3,500–4,000 RPM. The noise the exhaust makes, the instantaneous linear torque from the supercharger, it's just phenomenal, and it really just makes you feel like a little boy who's in his bedroom dreaming about that car that's on the poster on your bedroom wall. That's what this car is about, I think. It's not about sitting on the motorway trying to squeeze 40 miles to the gallon out of it. It's about running it through the rev range, listening to it come alive as you snort on the upshifts, as it cracks and popples when you're off the accelerator. And just really, that I think is the essence of what Jaguar were trying to breed into this when they designed it. Phenomenal. Phenomenal. So the next experiment I'm going to do is a standing start in dynamic mode. I'm going to run the gears through the ranges manually so that they get a bit higher up the rev range, and we're just going to have a look at that instantaneous readout on the bottom right there. There's quite a bit of traffic coming, bear with me, on my private airstrip. So I'm going to get a standing start ready to go, and here we go. Now, I wasn't quite looking at the dials all the way through that acceleration, but from glancing down, I didn't actually see it go below 2 miles to the gallon, which I'm actually a bit disappointed about. I'd have liked to have thought we could have got it down to 1 or even 0 if they're not putting decimal points in their readout there. 2 miles to the gallon, I definitely think there's room for improvement there on how low we can get it. The acceleration on this thing is just phenomenal. Warm day, nice grippy roads. The way it just took off there is, as I say, just makes you giddy with excitement, and the noise, the exhausts, the feeling of the feedback you get through the steering wheel and the pedals. It's just fantastic. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to pop it into standard driving mode, and I'm going to put it in rain and snow mode. I think the board at Jaguar Land Rover thought eco mode was probably a little bit of an oxymoron for this car, a little bit hypocritical, so we've got rain and snow mode on the selector down here. So we're sat at 58 mile an hour. You can see the average readout we're getting, you can see the instantaneous, and we're just going to flick it over into rain and snow. Again, I don't think anything really happened there. The only thing I've noticed is that the accelerator is much more dumbed down, almost as if it's just dulling the senses a little bit to make the car a little bit more predictable in those inclement environments. Pop it back into regular mode and we'll have a look at the average MPG again. Just knocking the speed up a little bit there, and you can see it's just dropped the MPG slightly where it's just coming up to speed, and then as we get there you'll see it just level out again. This has got to be probably the most boring video that I have filmed. So for the sake of healthy comparison, I'm going to do one final driving mode, not one that I really tend to drive in, but for the sake of science, let's do it. I'm going to leave it in regular driving mode, so not dynamic, not rain and snow, just normal, if you want to call it that. And I'm going to put it into manual with the exhaust closed, none of the bells and whistles and the thrills. I'm just going to put it into manual, driving it as you would effectively, I suppose, a manual car, but with the normal driving mode engaged. So let's see, let me get the right information on the screen. I've gone past it twice because I'm not paying attention. There we go. So I'm going to knock it over into manual mode. Wait for a gap in the traffic and we'll see what we get. Unfortunately, you're going to miss a lot of the average readouts because you end up with that big number in the centre telling you what gear we're in. Not necessarily a bad thing, although the car won't let you shift into an inappropriate gear, won't let you over rev. And here we go. So I don't know if you can pick that up on the microphone, but what's happening there is as you get over about 4,500 RPM, it opens up the valves in the exhaust. So I've not engaged the active exhaust, but as you get to that point in the rev range, it automatically opens that up. I guess it's to do with the amount of exhaust gas flow through the system. Let's pop the cruise on. You can see we're in 5th gear here, 30 MPG. If I was to knock that up a gear, you can see we're dropping, and if I knock it up again, dropping again. If I knock it up once more, yeah, I don't want to sit there for too long. That doesn't feel healthy, does it? So one word of caution that I've been caught foul of when I first got the car. When you're in dynamic mode, when you've got the gears knocked over into sport and you're using the gear stick in manual mode, it does sound amazing, but what the car won't do is it won't actually upshift or downshift automatically for you. So if you hit the top of the rev range when you're in dynamic, sport, manual, you'll just sit at the top of that rev range. And when you're in a low gear and you are pedal to the metal and you hit that limiter, it feels like you're hitting a brick wall. So just be very careful that if you're going for an overtake on a country lane, safely so, within the speed limit, but you hit that rev limiter, you won't keep going. You need to shift if you're in dynamic, sport and manual. Just a word of advice. The other thing that's really quite easy to fall into the trap of is you, on the off throttle, I don't know if the microphone's picking that up, but the sound is just absolutely phenomenal. And I spend so much time hanging the revs out in the high part of the band and just listening to that noise, which absolutely chews through the fuel. It's it also gets a lot of negative reception from my wife, who doesn't enjoy being kangarooed around the inside of the car when we're out. And I can't imagine, you know, if you were to be doing that around residential streets, it would go down too well with the local residents. So if you're wondering, you know, how to get those pops and crackles out of your car, I have done a video. I'll put a card up there now for it. I have done a video on exactly how to do that and where in the rev range you want to sit and how you handle the car to make that happen. I've had the car probably 7 months now and I'm still really not bored of that noise. It's just absolutely ludicrous. If you haven't already, give that video a check out. It will tell you exactly how to make that noise happen, and you'll be able to see exactly what I'm doing. From talking to some people in the community, it seems to be that the V8 does get a little bit of a better average MPG than the V6, and I think that really comes in where you're really having fun with the car, not just sitting on a motorway with the cruise control on, but having fun with the car, moving it through the rev range. And that V6 lump just has to work that little bit harder, rev that little bit higher to pull the weight of the car as it's moving up and down, you know, within its speed band. The V8 or the SVR, you know, the R, the SVR, if you've got an earlier V8S, that little bit more power, although it's got more displacement. Perhaps, you know, in my ramblings, I think that could be because the car's got to work less to pull its own weight around. Let me know what you think in the comments. But for today, thank you for bearing with me in this video. It's hopefully it's, you know, whilst, like I say, not the most inspiring, hopefully it's given some of you a bit of a real insight into what it's actually like to run one of these cars. If you haven't already, check out my video about the cost of ownership. I'm going to do exactly the same video as I've done here, the Real-World MPG costs for my D240 F pace that I use as my daily, just see exactly what we get out of that. And I'm also going to do a cost of living video, cost of ownership video for that D240 F pace as well, see how that compares to the running costs of the F Type. So thank you for watching, guys. Really hope that you did find this useful. Any feedback I'd love, please leave it down in the comments. If you're not already, give a like and subscribe. That's really what helps me just build this channel and keep pumping out content. I do pin down a 9-to-5 job on top of this. This is purely a hobby, but I love to see that some of you are really finding these useful and subscribing. So thanks to those that have, and if you haven't, just turn those notifications on and give a like and subscribe. But for now, thanks for watching.